Hi, welcome to Genesis Engineers Academy. In this video, we are going to learn about bearings, that is about introduction and definitions of some words, and also classifications of the bearings. So, bearings are mechanical elements that permit relative motion between two components and also transmission of load from one place to the other place with minimum friction. So you have to, that is, all shafts are mounted on bearings, which in turn mounted on some, that is, base of the body. Bear means to support and also to carry the weight of that one, and also to transmit the load acted upon the shaft through bearings, and which in turn transmits to the frame in which this bearing is assembled. So, what are the functions of bearings? It ensures free rotation of the shaft with minimum friction. That means the bearing reduces the friction to a greater amount, but we cannot eliminate the friction, that you know. Without this bearing also you can rotate, but the loss of the power will be more and more. That is why it is a must to provide these bearings to the shaft while rotating in any housing. It supports the shaft and hold it in correct position. So bearing shafts supports the shaft and hold it in a correct position. Otherwise, its centers may be changed. The third one is takes up the loads that acts on the shafts. The classifications of bearings classify one as radial bearing. Radial bearings are bearings which supports the shaft radially. That means it takes the load radially. So the radial supports the load which is perpendicular to the axis of the shaft. This is the example. So this red mark will provide us, that is radial. Next, thrust bearing. Thrust bearing supports the load which acts along the axis of the shaft. So shaft axis, that is load direction is shaft axis. Radial means the direction is perpendicular to the axis of the shaft. This classification is based on the direction of the force. This is the thrust one. This is. So you can assume that the shaft axis is at this point. Okay. So in this, this is shaft axis. So this is perpendicular to shaft axis. You can say this is the shaft axis. The load is this. In this, the shaft axis is this, and the load is like that. Right. Next classification is type of friction. If there is a sliding friction or otherwise a sliding contact or otherwise the surface of the shaft slides over the surface of the bush. So the main bearing housing is different, but we will insert the bush inside. In this bush we will insert the bearing. So this is basically general bearing. Okay, so this is the main bear housing. Okay, so this part you can say clearly this is the bush. In this the shaft is inserted. So in this part the shaft, the part in this rotates. Okay, right. To prevent friction, both the surfaces are separated by a thin film of lubricating oil, and also we use as a bush is made from bronze or white metal or zinc, aluminum, whatever it is, depending upon the use of this bearing. So the examples are sliding contact bearings. Examples are plain bearing, journal bearing, or otherwise sleeve bearing. Next one is rolling contact bearing, or also called as anti-friction bearing. So this is a deep groove ball bearing. So that is the example. So this bearing is also called as anti-friction bearing, as friction is negligible. But you don't forget one thing, that reducing if the friction is possible, but elimination is not possible. So examples of these bearings are used in many applications where the rotation is taking place. So that, for example, automobile axle, gearbox, machine tools, and also electrical motors. Fans also. Types of rolling contact bearings. So deep groove ball bearing. So this deep groove ball bearing. So this is outer race. Cut view is shown here. So this is the hardened balls, and this part is what you call inner race. So inner race and outer race will form some groove, like circular groove. In that the ball is inserted. That is why we call it as deep groove ball bearing. Okay, so the entire thing, this part and this part. Okay, so this part and the other part. So you can simply draw this one. So this is outer race, this is the ball, and the side ones are called, that is cage. So this part, the ball is holding in a, that is cage. Okay, so everything is moved as a one point. Okay, so this is the bore of the, that is bearing. In this we insert that is shaft. So shaft rotated along with the ball bearings, and this part is in rest. It won't rotate, it is stationary. So it can take axial as well as radial. So advantages of deep groove ball bearing is it can take radially and also axially. The radius of the ball is slightly less than the radius of the curvature of the, that why we provided groove, and this provides a point contact. And if you clearly observe, so this is the point contact, so this is the point contact. Okay, so that's all about deep groove ball bearing. Next one is cylindrical roller bearing. So in this also we have outer race, inner race, and also some case like, but here the rolling elements are cylinders, small cylinders. So in case of ball bearing, we use balls, spherical balls. So these bearings are used where high load carrying capacity is required. And this next to load carrying capacity is rest with cylindrical ball bearing. Okay, so this gives a line contact. This bearing cannot take thrust. Okay, so this cannot be used in footstep bearing or some axial thrust. So this is angular contact bearing. So if you observe, so this race is angular contact. Got it? So this angular contact makes it to be called as angular contact bearing. So this thing will intersect at one point. So this load carrying capacity is high compared to deep groove ball bearing. But the line of action at the point of contact for balls at the inner race and outer race makes an angle with the bearing. So this is generally ball bearing only, but the contact is angular. That is why it is called angular contact bearing. So due to this, it can take radial and axial loads simultaneously. However, two bearings are required to take thrust load in both the direction. If these to be added are used as thrust, we have to use two bearings. Single bearing cannot resist this or carry thrust load. The next one is self-aligning. So if there are misalignments, this will provide very good provision, that is alignment of this one. So this type of bearing, the external surface of the bearing bush is made spherical. Okay, so the center of this spherical surface is at the center of the bearing so that it can align itself with the journal. Tries to accommodate or aligned with the journal only. Okay, so this is self-aligning, but usage is very particular. So this is used to compensate any misalignment. It can take both radial and axial loads. The other things also take radial and axial, but deep groove bearing will not take the axial load. They take the only radial loads. Third one is a taper roll bearing. So this is a taper. They are cylindrical. The cylindricals are not taper, but the races are a taper. So the rolling elements are rollers only, like cylindrical. Inner and outer races are, that is, conical, and even case also. Like angular contact, so the axis of the rolling elements also will contact at one point, like this. All will contact at one point. You can assume like that. Next one is this is for pure rolling. Two bearings are required to take axial loads. It can also take both. Commonly used in automobiles, railway and machine tools also, where high loading capacity is to be transmitted and to be bared. Next one is thrust bearing. So in general, okay, thrust bearing consists of two row of balls. Okay, so we generally have two rows only, and in between there is a separation. Okay, so these bearings are generally used in the gearbox. Due to large number of balls, it can take comparatively high thrust load. So the name itself reveals that it can be used where high thrust is to be bared or transmitted. However, it can take thrust loading in single direction only. Needle roller bearings, very precision type of bearings. So this is characterized by needle-like rollers are used. See this one. So the diameter of the needle roller is usually less than 1/4 of this one, around 6 mm. Length of the needle roller can take from 3 to 10 times of its diameter. Okay, if that next one, needle rollers are located directly between the shaft and outer boring, just like. Okay, so you need not have any bushing like outer, gitter, no, nothing. So bearing is there, journal is there, or shaft is there. In between, we simply put needle rollers, but to prevent the movement of this outer side, we'll provide some guides also, like this. These are the guides. So it is capable of high radial load capacity. rocker arm pivots, pumps, compressors, universal joints, and other transmissions, we use needle roller bearings. Types of sliding contact bearings. So the sliding contact bearings are classified in three ways based on the type of the load carried, that is radial bearing and also thrust bearing, and also mixed radial and thrust. Okay, so the bearing classification based on the type of load, based on the type of lubrication, based on the lubrication mechanism. Okay, so initially what, finally what, in between what, like that. So this is radius of this journal. Okay, so the load is radial. In this is axial. Okay, this axis, the load is same. That is why it is called thrust load can be treated as axial load, and radial is along the radius of the journal. Thrust bearings or axial bearings. Thrust bearings can also be called as axial rods. Bears only axial. Next one is bearings classification based on the type of lubrication, that is thick film lubrication. That means between the bearing and the journal, the gap is very more. That gap is filled with the lubrication. In thin film lubrication, the space between the journal and the bearing is somewhat lesser than thick. Then it is, we call it as, and that is, there is a very thin lubrication is there. But boundary lubrication means almost lubrication film is zero. A little bit is provided, and the lubrication is also somewhat viscosity is very less. Okay. Next one is bearing classification based on lubrication mechanism. One is called hydrodynamic, the other one is called hydrostatic, the third one is elasto-hydrodynamic, and also fourth one is boundary lubricated, and the other one is called solid or solid film lubricated bearings. Okay, so these will in our next videos discuss about sliding contact bearings and also radial contact bearings. Okay, the selection of a bearing. So how you should, in what way you should select the bearing. For low and medium low radial loads, we go for ball bearings, whereas for heavy loads and large shaft diameters, roller bearings are selected. Okay, for small and medium, ball bearing. These are all radial only, and for heavy we go for roller bearings. Next, self-aligning and also spherical roller bearings are used in application where misalignment between the axis of the shaft and the housing is likely to exist. If you guess that there is or there will be a misalignment, we go for self-aligning. That means the self-aligning aligns according to the journal. And also spherical roller bearings. The thrust ball bearings are used for medium thrust loads, whereas for heavy thrust loads, cylindrical roller thrust bearings are used. Okay, balls also used in thrust bearing, rollers also used in thrust bearings. If the balls are used, that is thrust bearings. Okay, thrust ball bearings. If rollers are used, that we go for, that is for heavy loads, we go for roller. Even in radial, ball for small and medium, and roller for heavy. Deep groove ball bearings, angular contact bearing, and spherical roller bearings are suitable in applications where loads acting on the bearing surface consists of two components, that is a radial and thrust. Based on the rigidity of the selection of the bearing, in certain applications like machine tool spindles, double row cylindrical roller bearings are used, or taper roller bearings are used. Instead of double roller or double row cylindrical, we go for used taper roller bearings where the rigidity is a criteria. Noise becomes sometimes criteria for the selection in application like household appliances like fans. Under these, we go for deep groove ball bearings. I hope you understood well. So please subscribe. If not subscribe, wait for the notifications. For that, you have to press the ball, that is bell button, and also like if you are liked, share among